you may be asking yourself, what's your brand's real secret weapon? Well, in a way, it might be what you're not looking at, because my guest today is going to make a strong case for marketers to tap into a resource that they have, definitely, and probably wasting. It is the wisdom, the maturity, and in some cases, I would even say the cynicism of people who have been there, done that, been around the block a few times, perhaps. And Alex Meisl, my guest, well, he is this and more because he's the founder of greyhairworks. Love that name, and we'll get into it in a moment, exactly why it's such a cool name. And you might want to think of it as a marketing agency, but no, Alex, he has a different view. He says, and I quote, "It operates as a high-level therapist that listens to your challenges and helps recommend solutions, services, or people to resolve them." So in my book, that takes heart, that takes grit, and you combine them both, Alex. So I am elated to have you on In the Groove with me.
Peggy, it's such a delight, and I now feel slightly embarrassed. I've got to live up to this positioning.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I was looking at it, I was thinking your website, I mean, it is just amazing. What I love about it, you are on point. You are straight out. And when you talk to companies, when I talk to companies, they're like, well, we have to stand out. We have to be, we have to rise above the noise. And then they gravitate to the young, fresh ideas to do it. Blue hair helps, right? Are they short-sighted? Because look at your presence.
The most successful companies, I believe, has a diversity of talent. The trouble is these days, increasingly, what we're seeing, particularly amongst the largest companies, which are so driven by their quarterly results, is that the CFOs are always looking at ways of cutting costs. And sadly, the easiest way of cutting costs is to take out the most expensive folk. And typically, the most expensive folk tend to be the people who've got a degree of grey hair or who've been around the block a bit. And that is really dangerous because, as we're seeing in a lot of very large corporates, the easy game of getting rid of this senior level of management means that a lot of knowledge is walking out the door. And whilst you've still got the youth and the hunger and the dynamism of the 20 and 30-year-olds, they don't have that inbuilt knowledge or experience. They haven't lived through the challenges that maybe that level of senior management lived through. And as a result, down the road, and not necessarily that far down the road, corporates suddenly wake up and think, oh shit, where's that person who used to know how to run this piece of technology or do this thing or had the relationship with third party X? And suddenly things start falling apart.
And to your point, that technology, it's not always new technology. What I'm seeing so much, and I bet you as well, Alex, is that everything goes around, comes around, right? And now we're thinking very holistically. So guess what? App marketing isn't just app marketing anymore. It's omni-channel. It goes back into everything. And you have a long track record in this. I mean, you co-founded Sponge, which I remember very well, voted twice the mobile agency of the year, and you had a roster of clients. I mean, McDonald's, Morrison's, Coca-Cola, Barclays. You sold that. You embarked on this path to find greyhairworks. What was the spark behind that?
After I finished Sponge and then another business, I felt I still had something left in me. And I recognized that there was so much cool technology and so many cool services out there which weren't getting in front of decision makers at large corporates. So greyhairworks initially was set up as a lifestyle business for me. But things sort of seemed to explode and we got traction very quickly. So very rapidly, I had to sort of reinvent the business and move away from being a lifestyle business to bringing in a team of people who helped me out and have allowed us to grow much more quickly than I would have been able to do on my own. You used one way of describing us, which is this therapist sort of listening to challenges and suggesting solutions, services, and people. But an even simpler description is almost like a dating agency between corporates and technology or corporates and people. And back to the point about grey hair, very often the people with the knowledge are the people who've been around the block a bit, because as you say, what comes around goes around. New technology is very much new, but ultimately, when you really dig down, it's very often just a slightly different channel or a slightly different way of doing things. The knowledge that might have maybe been generated through being involved with the internet in the early days is just as relevant for the latest technologies now, whether it's social media, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's AI, etc. I think you and I, particularly from the mobile side, we've both seen in the early days of apps, for example, everyone jumping on board saying, I want an app. My neighbour's got an app. This competitor of mine's got an app. Give me an app. And for me, it's a very lazy way of thinking, because ultimately, the number one question within a corporate environment should be, how can an app help me? Or even going further back from that, what is the challenge I'm trying to resolve? And maybe an app is part of it. But there are so many other things which need to be resolved first.
So let's go back to greyhairworks, because what you've done is you've brought together maybe therapists, I don't know, but when I look at it and I look at what you've been up to, it's more like a collective brain than a consultancy. You know, there's lots of talent, lots of experience that you've put together, some of it very focused on the tech, some of it very focused on the creative, and all of it that you have brought together, that you have somehow banded together like, I don't know, it made me think of bunch of session musicians, you know, who finally said, forget this. I've been playing for the best bands. Now I'm going to do it on my own. That's what it felt to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, to an extent it is. We've got, the band back on the road, and we're
There you
focusing
go.
on the greatest hits. I mean, I think ultimately what we've managed to do is we've managed to create a central team of folk supported by the most amazing network of C-level executives from brands, retailers, and agencies around the world, with a whole raft of different experiences. The core purpose of greyhairworks is to listen to challenges faced by corporates and suggest SaaS solutions which will help resolve those challenges and allow the individual or the executive to sleep better at night. Chief Martech says there are something like 13,000 different SaaS solutions out there. So trying to sort of sort out what really makes sense, what is at the right stage of existence and development, that is fit for purpose and can work with a major CPG, FMCG or retailer or whoever, is quite a challenge. And whilst I would like to think we do a good job ourselves, this amazing network we've got around us helps support us, helps us evaluate solutions, introduces us to new solutions, and generally adds value to the broad offering. And the strange thing is, our business model is all about that personalized approach. And ultimately, it's down to trust more than anything else. And our model is totally based on the concept of trust. Because if we're talking to a big retailer like Marks and Spencer's or Boots, or a brand like Mars or Pepsi or whoever, and we suggest a solution to solve a problem which we're not comfortable or confident will, and if it doesn't work out, guess what? They're not going to talk to us anymore. So it is very much in our interest to listen to what their challenges are, to suggest things which will help, maybe even suggest things they hadn't thought about because they hadn't even thought of certain challenges as existing. They assumed they were just endemic to the way they do business. But ultimately, if we serve them right, even if it means in the short term we're maybe not making as much money, they will keep coming back to us because they trust us and they see us as a peer of theirs who listens to them and has the collective knowledge to be able to say, hey, when we were in that situation, or one of our network was in that situation, this is what that person did, this is how they resolved it, and this is how they allowed things to move on.
And the business model itself, Alex, I'm just thinking about it, is a little bit refreshingly old school. Yes, it does matter. You have a relationship, you invest, you give advice, as you said yourself, maybe not making a mint at the start, but that's not the point. The point is the long-term vision that so many people just simply do not have. As I said, you brought the band together. Just curious how you enable and unlock them, because they're all very, very experienced in their own right. Theoretically, they could also go out and start their own gig.
Absolutely.
Keeping the band pun here, I just realized. They could go out on their own gig, but they're with you. So there's something here about how you see the people you're working with and how you sort of liberate in them the ability to contribute as well.
So I think there are different ways of looking at it. I mean, first of all, after creating greyhairworks, more and more of the corporates who we were helping started saying to us, we need some help, and it's more consultancy type of help. So we set up a separate division called Grace & Co., which is a consultancy in its own right. But the big difference is, back to your question, we don't use a single career consultant within the business. We are only using these senior executives with industry experience who can be objective, who've already been involved in sort of similar challenges. So
they've had the pain. They've had the
exactly.
pain.
So in terms of empowering them and making it work, I mean, there are a number of different ways of answering it. First of all, yes, you can always either go down the Robbie Williams or Take That route. And some people would prefer to have a solo singing career. But most people we found who maybe go it alone suffer from 2 or 3 different challenges. I mean, first of all, there's the whole feast and famine piece. You know, when they're doing consultancy, they're too busy to win new business, and then suddenly it ends and everything drops off a cliff. Secondly, that there's almost a loneliness factor. You're working in a bit of a vacuum, so you don't necessarily know what's going on in the outside world. And then thirdly, being part of our community, one, obviously brings you into contact with a lot more people, but also our networked approach allows us to deliver work that maybe an individual wouldn't be able to deliver on their own, whether it's getting onto the pitch list of a large corporate, whether it is they've got brilliant sector expertise in this narrow area, but they don't know how to pull in the other people with knowledge in other areas to deliver a bigger project. In a way, because we are focusing on people typically at least halfway through their careers, if not further than that, some of them maybe don't have the pure financial pressure that maybe someone in their 30s with young family might have. So they are involved with us in so many different ways. What always amazes our network of senior executives who we call Grownups, much to various people's amusement. What always amazes Grownups is that when they introduce us to a corporate or bring us into a friend at a corporate, and we talk through what we can do, first of all, almost without fail, the corporate says, that's amazing. You know, I'm talking to someone who's not trying to sell at every moment, that you're genuinely trying to help me and listen to my challenges. But without fail, that corporate will go back to the grown up afterwards and say, thank you so much for making that introduction. They really get me and they're really trying to help me.
There's value to experience, understanding, knowing your shit, basically. But there's a lot of articles, more I'm seeing actually, about ageism on Adweek, elsewhere, talking about, the industry has basically stopped using folks over 50. We talked about it could be a question of cost, but it could go deeper than that. What's your take here?
Older people are being shunned more and more. I think in some ways it's a pity because that experience doesn't go away. And yes, people are paranoid that older people don't work as hard and aren't as hungry or as enthusiastic as youth. But I mean, to sort of share a slightly crude joke, which I quite like, that there's a young bull and an old bull at the top of a hill, and they see this whole field of cows at the bottom of the hill, and the young bull turns to the old one and says, hey, let's run down there as fast as possible and have fun with a couple of the cows. And the old bull says, why don't we walk down gently and we can have fun with all of them? And I think in a way that makes sense. Youth is dynamic but impetuous, lacks knowledge. The experience collectively that older folk have built up and proper hands-on experience means that very often just a short amount of knowledge shared can solve a problem which might take someone who's approaching it for the first time, days, weeks, months. Certainly, we're working with some of the largest corporates in the world, helping them with, a whole raft of different challenges. And they appreciate the fact that they're dealing with folk who they can have proper conversations with, who they can cut to the chase with, who are also not tied up with politics or bureaucracy. They're fed up with dealing with those sort of things. They just want to get shit done.
I hear you. I'm thinking the whole time, and it is what it is. It's just an observation, because of course I am being pitched from agencies and people who are in charge of their clients, and sometimes they don't know what they're pitching me. It's just these big puppy eyes where it's junior account managers, just the bane of my existence now, because you have a question and it's like, I'm like, well, what does that mean? What is this? I don't know, make it up. What's this sandbox announcement mean to your business? And they're like, what? And it goes on and on like that. And it's not that I want people to be down in the weeds with me, but I want context. And that's what's often failing. It's what's lacking, rather. It's just not there. It's they have that pitch, they read that pitch, they tell me you can interview someone about X. I'm like, well, great. Why don't we do Y? It's like, wasn't there. I can't deal with that.
You've gone off script, cannot compute, don't know how to deal with it.
Cannot do it.
But I think sadly that there are many poor uses of AI which play into that as well. The number of approaches I get from people, which it's clearly written by a slightly shit AI tool, because ultimately, we've been following your progress with your company. Insert strapline of what company does. You must be very pleased with what you've achieved. Can we sell you some shit? Every single time. And as a result, no wonder selling is becoming more difficult as well, because it is so easy to lazily spam folk. The recipients are even more nervous about any third-party approach they might get, which is back again to this idea of a trusted network. So if you're dealing with people who speak your language, who genuinely are trying to help you, guess what? You'll do nicely.
Let's talk about the clients, the customers, the people you are providing your therapy services to. There's got to be great examples where, experience just trumped the hype. I don't know how many times, and you've been there too, Alex, you've got these people, and they're not always young. Sometimes they're just mid-age, but just very naive. And it's just like, oh, well, let's just do, X.
At the moment, we're working, with a huge global CPG brand, helping them sort of restructure and rearrange their agency networks. We're working with a division of Unilever on things like virtual influencers. We're helping a major confectionery brand engage at a deeper level with retailers and help them become more innovative. Through to some major high street retailers come to us and say, we've got this specific challenge. We don't want to do a beauty parade and bring in 50 different suppliers who claim to be able to resolve our problem. Tell us the two best players we should have a talk to, who you feel that we can contract with. And that saves them a huge amount of time. And because we've got our network of Grownups who will help advise us or, enhance our knowledge in specific areas, it allows us to do that in a very efficient way, which the retailer or the brand really appreciates. And it just means they get stuff done more quickly. We don't tend to deal with many corporates these days who are looking at Horizon 10, 20, or whatever the, whatever the epithet is. It's much more, give me something which will make me look good in this quarter or next quarter. Because again, corporates are so driven by their quarterly results. And so what we tend to focus on, certainly from the curation of solutions to help corporates, is it's not so much get rid of all of your technology, change your tech stack and bring this new stuff in. It's much more, here's something which you can plug in, which will deliver an incremental benefit to whatever the process is that you're running. I would say 2/3 of the consultancy is much more about here and now, benchmarking, what does good look like, what are others doing. I need to do my first steps in AI, metaverse, virtual influencers, whatever it is. There's a bit of more medium-term stuff, but most people these days are, because job cycles tend to be shorter and shorter, people need to make things happen which reflects well on them, rather than them moving on and their replacement getting the glory.
Do you hear the irony here, though, Alex? I mean, they need to get something done. It needs to matter. It needs to have impact in the short term. And what they're going for is, experience, people who think long term, people who have seen the pain points, dealing with it. It's kind of ironic in a way, isn't it? That you're saying, I want to have a wow factor right now, and I'm going to go to the Grownups to do it.
I think it's ironic, but it also exposes the confusion which exists within large companies, because some of the solutions in our portfolio are not only very easy to implement, but they're not exactly rocket science. And what you sometimes get from the large corporates is, we could do that ourselves. And you go back to see them 6 months later and they say, yeah, it's still on our agenda to do. And then eventually they will come back to us and say, do you know what? We've never got round to doing it. Can you do it? Because there is this mindset amongst corporates, particularly retailers, I'd argue, where wherever possible, especially the larger retailers, they always want to do things themselves. And yes, that's great. There are certain things that retailers should do themselves because it allows them to have that extra knowledge and that advantage over their competitors. But there are lots of things which retailers shouldn't need to be involved with and really should outsource, because it's not central to their capabilities. It doesn't add any value. And by trying to do it internally, to me implies that there is a CTO or CIO with maybe a bit more power than they deserve, or who want to build up their own power base or fiefdom, who insist on trying to do everything themselves, and you end up with this huge mess. And guess what? They always leave, and they leave this mess behind for someone else to sort out.
So sooner or later, you get that call, don't you, Alex?
You do. and being sort of very open and honest, there are times where we've had to say, do you know what? That's too much of a nightmare, or we don't think we can do it, rather than the sort of default sales approach, which is yes, and then worry about it afterwards, because our clients value the fact that we say it as it is. Similarly, even if a client says no to us about something, we won't necessarily take no as an answer. We will, if appropriate, not argue back, but forcefully explain why we think they're wrong. Whereas a vendor will just say, yes, I'll tug my forelock and go away feeling slightly hurt. We feel that we can have a quality conversation with that client and express our views forcefully.
That's where it comes from. That's the grit. And that's also what people need sometimes. A little bit of tough love, because guess what? It could be wrong, or just looking at it a different way. And you're just saying, look, we're looking at it this way, and we want to share it with you because you have experience. You have maturity, as you said yourself, maybe some cynicism as well. Working with you, I would imagine, is refreshing. I love this kind of stuff, get straight answers to straight questions. That's grand. That's life.
But straight answers to straight questions with the odd swear word thrown in, but yes.
I love it. There's part of me that sees in you a little bit of Nick Fury, because it's like the Avengers. You've got your group, and we haven't talked about their talents, their superpowers. And you bring them together and they sort of band together to attack a certain problem. Share a little bit of the superpowers, or if you will, even calling out individuals amongst the grown-ups. I'd like to get an idea about what you bring together, what you bundle together when you're attacking these problems in the very straightforward way that you do.
let me sort of highlight some of the grown-ups in the portfolio just to give a flavour. But we've got everyone from the ex-European Sales and Marketing Director at Mars through to the ex-Global Head of Editorial at Snapchat, to the ex-boss of AO.com, to people in retail. I mean, Michael, who runs our consultancy, used to be the CEO of Digitas in the UK. We've got the ex-head of retail at IBM. So a really eclectic mix. We don't just want to focus on people from a tech background or CMOs or retail. It's important to create an eclectic mix of folks so that it's a proper community, which is slightly eclectic, but everyone gets value from it.
And you brought them together. There's something about you, Alex, because everyone's more than a title. And your title, what was it you were calling yourself? You weren't founder. You were.
Yes, I'm trying out a new one, which is incredibly pretentious, which is progenitor. But it ultimately means founder of things. But I mean, I think people, in the early days, we felt like complete frauds. So trying to do something, and I wouldn't say it was hot air, but on day one, it's a bit like when you launch a dating agency. On day one, you don't have any men in it or any women in it. So how do you get going? But we started, with some good friends of mine, ex-Red Bull, Procter and Gamble, Arcadia, etc. And bit by bit, it snowballed. And we're now up to about 150 people across the US, Europe, and slowly starting in Asia as well. Why people become involved? I think there are a number of different reasons. One, it's partly because they sort of feel sorry for me and realize that I desperately need help to do what I'm doing. What they're getting out of it is a mixture of being kept fully abreast of some of the cool technology which is out there, being part of a proper community where introductions are made. They're constantly meeting new people, both online and physically, because we run live events as well. And ultimately, through coming across these cool technologies, which we introduce them to, it almost acts as a Trojan horse for them to allow them to re-engage with their networks and ultimately even maybe make a bit of money out of it as well. But I mean, none of them do it from a purely commercial sense. Back to what you were saying before, it's much more about paying it forwards, recognizing this is cool technology, recognizing someone would benefit from being exposed to it, and helping us bring the two sides together.
And it's invigorating. I mean, that's what we all set out doing when we started our careers. And I couldn't imagine, I was chatting with my husband about it recently. It's like, well, what are you going to do when you're not writing, not podcasting, not doing this? And I'd say, I'd probably start another one. I can't imagine not. Maybe sit down and write another proper book, but you don't stop. You just don't stop.
You don't stop. And all we're doing is democratizing something that people have been doing for a long time, but doing it on a sort of broader scale. I mean, back to the idea of a solo singer or a group rather than necessarily the Nick Fury piece, is when someone leaves a corporate and decides to do something along the lines of what we're doing, their network by default is smaller. Very often their network isn't nearly as good as they thought it was, because it was partly the fact they were with a very big brand and that gave a certain status to them.
Yeah.
But also the half-life of their network tends to be very short. And for the first few months when they make calls into their mates at corporates, those calls will be received. But then bit by bit, I wouldn't say they get ostracized, but people are no longer rushing to respond to them in the same way. Whereas being part of a group, it allows us to sort of engage with more people in different ways and be more relevant in more occasions than would otherwise be the case.
Just thinking about that recently, I have a friend and he was in UA and he was, the UA managers are always the rock stars, the dinners, the invites, everything. And now it's like, well, he's a consultant. He's very, very smart, but he's not responsible for a particular budget at this point. And that's just it. It's sort of like, well, those events we're going to, it's not what it used to be because of that. But at the same time, everyone he knows and everything that he actually brings to the table is vast. So it's a different value, but still part of the picture very much.
Well, I heard a sort of really quite unpleasant story the other day. We're interviewing someone to be a grown up, and until recently he had a very senior role at a very large corporate. And one of the things he did was he lectured on a very part-time basis on marketing at a leading business school, was made redundant from the company. He got in touch with the business school and said, just want to check you still want to use me. Obviously, the content is the same, blah, blah, blah. And they dropped him immediately. And he was saying, half a second, I'm still teaching exactly what I did before to great acclaim and, won plaudits, everything else. But because he could not say he was with brand X anymore, the business school dropped him. And sadly, one sees that behavior more frequently than I'd like to admit. We're not going to put up with it, and we're going to push back, and we will fight as much as we can, just to prove that experience and the odd grey hair, certainly with the men. I'm not quite so sure about the fairer sex. I don't quite know how they manage to do it themselves. But yeah,
we color it, Alex.
No, I find that hard to believe. But we will, we're fighting back, and we're proving there is still, we still have a lot of use, and that we can still add value.
I said at the start, this is your company. I know you won't really take the full credit, but there's a spark, there's something there. And I'm trying to figure it out because I'm putting it together with what you do in your spare time. And I asked you, and then you told me, okay, jam maker. And I was thinking, okay, blending, shaping, creating out of all of the flavors, the blend, something amazing. Have I nailed it here?
I think so. And it's also, we're very lucky. We live in the countryside, and we have a garden where lots of things grow. And it allows you to come up with mixtures you wouldn't necessarily think make sense, but actually work remarkably well. The one thing I have to stress is rhubarb and blackcurrant has to be tried to be believed. And so when we next meet, I'll bring some along with me.
Now I will. We will absolutely be meeting up, Alex, without question. I'm in London a lot for business and meetings and never having fun. And I'm always open to a new flavor. Maybe that's what
Fantastic.
Brought us together again, because what goes around comes around. I do want to leave our listeners, though, with the chance to connect with you on a different level, be it LinkedIn, be it just through this super cool website that I just love the design of. What's the best way to stay in touch with you and just to connect? As you said yourself, sometimes it's just sharing experience. Other times it's learning from one another. How do we do it best with you?
So three different ways. Follow me on LinkedIn. Our website is greyhairworks.com, greyhairworks.com, or just email me, alex@greyhairworks.com. And just to humor Americans, we've even registered GRAY just in case.
I love it. Love it. Well, it's been a delight, Alex. This is my show in the groove with myself. I choose my guests. I have my fun, and I have had that today. And of course, knowledge is for sharing, not just for you, but for all of us. So, if you're listening in, spread the word, tell your tribe, tell them you like the show, subscribe to the channel, smash that button. All of the above would be amazing. Thanks again so much.
You're most welcome. Lovely being on.
And of course, if you're tuning into In the Groove on YouTube, well, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. It will allow you to stay up to date with the series. And not only that, enjoy the pure gold of knowledge and insights our guests bring to every episode.